Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story: a federal court sentences another illegal Chinese agent to prison time. Details on what he did to aid Beijing's transnational suppression on American soil. President Biden urging the U.S. to outcompete China in artificial intelligence in his farewell address. A look at the state of play. Trump's pick for national security advisor has favorable views for TikTok. He says the president-elect is looking at options to keep the app in the U.S. market. That's as the Chinese-owned app is 3 days away from a nationwide ban. And Beijing appears to be launching another tit-for-tat battle with Washington, this time targeting a lower tech class of microchips it buys from the U.S. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Before we dive into today's news, make sure to use the link below to subscribe to our newsletter. Each week we round up the highlights and controversies happening around China and the world and share an exclusive behind-the-scenes snapshot with our readers. Keep an eye out. The newsletter will land in your inbox Friday morning. Another illegal Chinese agent sentenced in the U.S. this Wednesday. He's slated to spend 2 years in prison starting mid-April. The Chinese man was among the first ones being convicted in Beijing's Operation Fox Hunt campaign, a secret extensive plan the U.S. labeled as part of China's cross-border suppression. The man is also a U.S. green card holder. Zhu Yong was convicted for multiple crimes, including acting as an illegal agent for China and stalking a former Chinese official who lives in New Jersey. According to federal court documents, Zhu was helping Chinese authorities pressure the former official to go back to China. Court documents show the official received a note written in Chinese back in 2018. The translated message reads, quote, "If you are willing to go back to the mainland and spend 10 years in prison, your wife and children will be all right. That's the end of this matter." The former official's elderly father and sister, still living in China, were also harassed by local authorities. The regime accuses the former official of bribery, an allegation he denied. He says he was targeted because of the regime's internal politics. The case relates to a broad campaign launched by Beijing nearly a decade ago called Operation Fox Hunt. It aims to coerce expatriates and dissidents to return to the country for trial. The U.S. has criticized China for cross-border suppression, saying it undermines American laws, sovereignty, and national security. Back to Zhu's sentencing. After 2 years behind bars, Zhu will likely face deportation from the U.S. and his green card could be canceled. Besides Zhu, another Chinese man and a retired NYPD officer were also found guilty in this case. The two men are set to be sentenced this winter. An unusual allegation from the Chinese regime. Thursday, China threatened to probe certain microchips the U.S. exports to China without saying when the investigation would begin. The targeted U.S. chips are considered mature, older, and mainly used for basic applications. They're far less capable than the advanced tech used to power AI. What's behind the probe? Beijing is accusing American companies of dumping their products into the country at low prices and hurting China's industry. The regime also vowed to investigate whether these businesses are backed by unfair subsidies from Washington. Interestingly, it's the exact same allegation the U.S. and European Union have been making about Chinese electric car makers, plus a wide range of Chinese exports. China's statement comes less than a week before President-elect Trump takes office. He has repeatedly threatened to impose tariffs on China in his first executive order. And just 1 day ago, President Biden warned that Washington would tighten Beijing's access to certain U.S. biotech exports. A plan for export controls on the biotech field announced by the Commerce Department Wednesday. The goal to keep American biotech equipment and technology related to artificial intelligence out of Beijing's reach. The department said the technology can be used for boosting human performance, innovating direct communication links between computers and the human brain, and possibly making biological weapons. Washington has raised concerns that Beijing could exploit these studies to advance its own military. It's considered one of the Biden administration's last moves to counter China and follows a recent round of export controls on shipping cutting-edge chips to China. Trump is exploring options for how to preserve TikTok. That's the word coming from Trump's pick for National Security Advisor, Congressman Mike Waltz. This as the Chinese-owned app is 3 days away from a ban on U.S. soil, unless it divests from its Chinese owner. The Supreme Court has heard oral arguments over TikTok's fate, but has not released a decision as of Thursday morning.
Florida Congressman Mike Waltz made the comments after Fox News anchor Brett Baier asked him about a Washington Post report. The report said that Trump was considering an executive order to suspend the ban on the popular platform. Waltz added, quote, "President Trump has been very clear. Number one, TikTok is a great platform that many Americans use and has been great for his campaign and getting his message out. But number two, he's going to protect their data." TikTok is owned by Chinese parent company ByteDance. Trump joined TikTok during his 2024 presidential campaign. Now, his team used it to connect with younger voters, especially men. Trump has credited the platform with helping him win more of the youth vote.
President Biden saying goodbye to America as his 5-decade political career is coming to an end. In his farewell address Wednesday, Biden mentioned China twice, saying the U.S. has pulled ahead in the competition with China. He added the U.S. must lead in artificial intelligence. Watch.
We must make sure AI is safe and trustworthy and good for all humankind. And as the land of liberty, America, not China, must lead the world in the development of AI.
Beijing aims to outcompete Washington in artificial intelligence by 2030. Just like nuclear weapons in the 60s, artificial intelligence is critical to the battle for dominance. Whoever takes the lead in AI will seize a major advantage on future battlefields. Right now, the U.S. leads the globe in artificial intelligence, but experts warn China is catching up in some areas. A report from Harvard says China has overtaken the U.S. in some kinds of AI technology, from facial recognition to drones to 5G. Back to President Biden, his term ends on January 20th, the day he will hand the reins to President-elect Donald Trump. Tune in Monday for NTD's special coverage of the presidential inauguration starting 9 a.m. Eastern. China and India have been top buyers of discounted Russian oil amid Western sanctions, but they could be forced to source the fuel elsewhere after the latest round of sanctions from Washington, this time targeting major Russian oil producers. How could it impact the oil and gas industry here in the U.S.? NTD's Melina Weisskopf spoke to Tim Stewart, president of U.S. Oil and Gas Association, for insight.
Joining us is Tim. Now, Tim, the U.S. is now sanctioning Russian oil producers that supply China and India. Does this put adequate pressure on Russia, and how do you see this impacting the American oil and gas industry?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot of uncertainties going forward between now and next week and then in the next coming months. I think the challenge that we've had as an industry and as a nation is the Biden administration announced sanctions but didn't always quite enforce them, and in the waning days of their administration they decide to ratchet that up. I think it sends a clear message, and I think some of the trading partners of the U.S. who have been able to skirt those sanctions with the ghost fleets of tankers that have been working around the globe moving Russian crude, I think they're starting to take that a little more serious as well. It's going to definitely have an impact on the markets. I think we've seen that over the last couple of days as you've seen the price of crude creep up when people are starting to realize that as the new administration comes in, and if they're serious, then the trading partners need to be far more responsive to the U.S. demands on sanctions.
We know that China, the Shandong Port Group in eastern China, has banned U.S. sanctioned tankers, prohibiting them from docking, unloading, or accessing port services. Now, Tim, if China strictly enforces this, do you think that could incentivize greater energy independence here in the U.S.?
I think so, yeah. And again, these are U.S. sanctioned vessels coming in. I think the Trump administration is really trying to get us back to this North American energy dominance situation that we were in 8 years ago. And by doing so, it means that we'll need to work closely with the U.S. producers, but also the Canadian producers as well. That's why the Canadians are watching the tariff play as closely as they are, is because that will have impact on the U.S. markets also. But again, the U.S. is the world's energy superpower. And the Biden administration didn't use that superpower status very well. In fact, actually, they surrendered a lot of that leverage that they would have. And again, this is an opportunity, I think, for the U.S. to reassert its dominance, our role as a swing producer, and our role as a global energy policy maker.
Right, and as we're close with this Biden administration and expecting that Trump administration to come in and change a lot of policies related to energy, what specific policies would you like to see coming from the incoming administration to support the oil and gas industry?
You know, I get asked that all the time, and what I say is the most important thing they can do is to put the paddles on the chest and breathe new life into the federal onshore and offshore leasing program. The president himself controls about 15 to 20% of all of the oil and gas assets in the United States that sit on, and those assets sit on federal lands onshore and on the offshore. And we've seen where the federal leasing program has all but just atrophied to the point where it hardly exists right now. The very first thing that the Trump administration can do is say we're going to have robust quarterly lease sales, both onshore and offshore, going forward. What that does is that balances the production pipeline, and it reduces the demands on private lands and allows the federal operators to be doing what they want to do. Now, having said that, the Biden administration action last week where they put a drilling restriction on 625 million acres is going to be difficult to unravel, but I think we're ready to do that.
Tim Stewart, the U.S. Oil and Gas Association president. Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up, China officially kicks off its travel rush for the Lunar New Year holiday. Citizens are set to make 9 billion trips nationwide. This as several viruses are spreading in the country, putting China's neighbors on alert. An insider reveals a deep fear rooted in the Chinese Communist regime. That is, its brutal persecution against a faith group and the truth about forced organ harvesting. And the world's largest auto market is losing its luster. Porsche and BMW report sales slump inside China as competition from domestic brands picks up. These stories and more after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. China kicked off the Lunar New Year travel rush on Tuesday. Authorities estimate a record 9 billion domestic trips will be made during the 40-day holiday period. This as several viruses spread across the country, prompting concerns from China's neighbors.
China's holiday travel rush got into full swing Tuesday. The 40-day Spring Festival saw airports and train stations packed with travellers. After a total 8.4 billion trips last year, authorities predict 2025 will see a record 9 billion domestic journeys. But this year's festival comes with China's economy in the doldrums. It's struggling to recover from years of pandemic lockdowns and a prolonged property slump. The government has rolled out a series of stimulus measures in recent months in a bid to boost demand. That includes interest rate cuts and expanded trade-in schemes for consumer goods. Travel demand at least seems to be holding up, with records expected across all modes of transport. Train trips are forecast to hit 510 million, with 90 million plane trips predicted, both being all-time highs.
Chinese doctors are warning about recent surges of multiple viruses, including the HMPV virus, influenza A virus, and H5N1 bird flu. Local reports say sickened children have been infected by multiple viruses at the same time. The influenza A virus reportedly has caused some children to develop fatal brain damage. That level of severity has been previously documented in case reports published in the U.S. National Library of Medicine database. But the situation is rarely covered by Chinese media. Last Thursday, the Chinese CDC admitted that influenza cases across the country's northern and southern regions are climbing. Those areas are home to the majority of China's population. Right now, videos on Chinese social media show that many hospitals are full of patients waiting for medical attention. As this year's travel rush kicks off, we will keep you updated on how the viruses are developing inside China. An inside tip from China's top security agency is revealing a deep fear rooted in the communist regime. That is, its brutal persecution of a faith group and the truth about the regime's forced organ harvesting. These crimes against humanity have been widely exposed on the world stage. Now, some Communist Party leaders reportedly say the violent campaign it launched 25 years ago against the faith could spell the party's doom.
The New York Times recently published a series of articles trying to paint Shenyun Performing Arts and its members' religious faith, Falun Gong, in a negative light. Falun Gong, also known as Falun Dafa, is a spiritual meditation practice guided by the principles of truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. It was first introduced to the public in China in 1992 and gained widespread popularity before the Chinese regime launched a nationwide persecution campaign against it in 1999. Shenyun is a classical Chinese dance company founded in 2006 by Falun Gong practitioners in the U.S. The company is dedicated to reviving traditional culture and raising awareness about the persecution of the faith group. An official working in China's Public Security Department told the Epoch Times that the story behind the move is complicated. The official has previously provided credible information from the highest level of the CCP's security body. NTD concealed his identity due to safety concerns. The source said that the leader of the Chinese Communist Party, Xi Jinping, and his state security minister, Chen Yixin, have a secretive plan to eradicate the faith group overseas. According to the source, Minister Chen has warned Xi that anyone involved in the persecution of Falun Gong could be sued by an international court. That's if the U.S. government were to launch an investigation into the persecution, especially over live organ harvesting. The source called the details of the persecution so inhuman that exposing them to mainstream public awareness would prompt widespread calls to hold the CCP regime accountable, and that would lead to the regime's collapse. As for how the New York Times articles come into play, the source said that CCP spies have provided the newspaper with many tips, connected its reporters with ex-Shenyun performers. The lead author of the articles, reporter Nicole Hong, said in an interview with her paper that she and her colleague, Michael Rothfeld, started working on the articles after a tipster approached them with supposed information on the inner workings of Shenyun and introduced them to an ex-performer. Shenyun was hit with a lawsuit in November filed by an ex-performer who left the company about 5 years ago. This woman has been a key source of the allegations in the paper and the lawsuit. Parts of the suit appear to be lifted from a New York Times article. In response to the allegations, Shenyun described them as, quote, undoubtedly part of a coordinated offensive against our company being orchestrated by the Chinese regime. The company also highlighted the ex-performer's questionable ties to Beijing. In the first 2 years after she left the company, she wrote about how much she had loved her time with Shenyun. She also made several requests to return to the company to work as a teacher. However, that changed after she started working for a Chinese state-owned entity about 2 years ago. Last year, a state court sentenced a man named Chen Jun to 20 months in prison for attempting to bribe the IRS to cancel Shenyun's nonprofit status. He was found to be acting as an agent for China.
Luxury car makers Porsche and BMW are seeing their sales fall in China. That's as local competition remains fierce. Let's take a closer look.
Foreign automakers are on a downhill slope in the world's largest car market. Porsche and BMW are the latest car makers to report sales slumps in China. German sports car maker Porsche reported a 28% tumble last year, and BMW 13%. Porsche is citing a, quote, continued challenging economic situation as Chinese consumers pull back on spending amid a sustained real estate crisis. Foreign car makers are also facing increased local competition. BYD and Xiaomi offer tech electric vehicles at a very affordable price, and BYD has released several luxury cars. Mercedes-Benz, Volkswagen, Toyota, Honda, and GM have all reported hits in the China market.
Austrian advocacy group None of Your Business filed a privacy complaint against TikTok, Shein, Xiaomi, and 3 other Chinese companies Thursday. The nonprofit claims the firms are unlawfully sending European Union user data to China. Here's more.
None of Your Business is known for filing complaints against American companies such as Apple, Alphabet, and Meta. The organization's efforts have led to several investigations and billions of dollars in fines. The Vienna-based group said this is their first complaint against Chinese firms. None of Your Business has filed 6 complaints in Greece, the Netherlands, Belgium, Italy, and Austria for suspension of data transfers to China. In the U.S., a federal ban on TikTok is set to go into effect on Sunday. The social media platform is owned by Chinese company ByteDance.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For on-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.